There ain't no snow on Snow Hill, and New Street's looking old. Henry's and Grey's had marvellous days, but sadly they did fold. There ain't no tear on the hippodrome, so a Brummie sits and dotes about Brummie Gem when boys were men in Lou Bloom overcoats.
All right, Carl Chinn here, at the top of the rotunda, looking over at our Brum, seeing the sights and harking to the sounds of our city. And what a city it is, stretching all the way from the high ground of King's Standing in the north to the fields of Worcestershire in the south at the Maypole, from the confines of Staffordshire in the west at Windsor Green to the green lands of Warwickshire in the east at Sheldon. But how much of our city do we really know? Why not come with me and have a tour of hidden Brum?
Modern Birmingham. It's now raucous, bustling and boisterous, dominated by that symbol of the post-war redevelopment, the round rotunda. And yet here, in the middle of the city, around Digbeth and Derrit End, there are so many hints of our past. We only have to look at St Martin's Church, standing there since at least the 1100s, and nearby Moat Row and Moat Lane, recalling the time when Birmingham once had a manor house surrounded by a moat. Close to the church was placed also the market, the reason for Birmingham's emergence from an agriculturally insignificant place. And why were the markets placed here? Well, you only have to look around and see the traffic. This Digbeth Derrit End High Street was a major route, coming up from London, Stratford and Warwick from the south, crossing the River Ray between Digbeth and Derrit End, going up the hill, over Bennett's Hill, through High Street, Birmingham, and across to Bull Street, and thence to the Wednesbury Road, the Soho Road, on its way to Shrewsbury. A market, a route, these were the origins of Birmingham. It's funny to think that all the streets that now lay off Digbeth were once parkland, where the lord of the manor would get on his oars and have a little ride around the little park, as opposed to his big park, which was over in Rotten Park. And yet there are still some indications of that medieval past. Park Street, Milk Street, named after all the cows that once grazed here. But Digbeth wasn't going to stay rural for long. Rapidly, industry established itself, and one of the reasons was not only the road, not only the proximity of the market, but also the vast amounts of water that were available here. Well Lane, for example, named after a deep artesian well, sunk in 1854, and which each day gave out 72,000 gallons of pure, fresh water. We forget that, but not far away in Bourville Street, the water was also important in the foundation of Shall's Brewery. So rapidly, Digbeth was transformed from countryside into heaving industrial Birmingham. By the time of Queen Elizabeth, much of Digbeth was covered with houses and small workshops. So much so that in 1586, a man called William Camden stated that Birmingham, which really then was just Digbeth, that Birmingham was swarming with inhabitants and echoing to the noise of anvils. Everywhere you looked, there were these forges and small places where men and women took metal and fashioned it into small goods that were desired across the world. But by the 19th century, there were many bigger factories as well, like this superb structure built by Corder and Turley. Umbrella manufacturers. Just take a look at the fantastic terracotta designs in the middle of the building itself. And then there were other major manufacturers locally and producers of things. For example, Thai Food Tea of Bawdley Street, founded by the Sumner family not far away on Digbeth, and then gradually moving over to a much larger warehouse where they could pack the small fannings, the little leaves that they got from Ceylon to make their distinctive Thai Food Tips tea. Sadly, Thai Food Tea is no longer in Birmingham, but thank goodness there remain a host of firms which reflect Birmingham's traditions of making things and which are still bringing employment and trade to Digbeth and to Birmingham as a whole. Throughout our history, the people of Birmingham have been famed for our manufacturing prowess, for our skill at the making of things. You name it, we made it, because Birmingham was, and still is, the workshop of the world, the city of 1,000 trades. Just think of all the things that were created and crafted in our city. Steel pen nibs, gold, jewellery, and one of the things that made our name, buttons. In fact, we made so many buttons that Brummies were known as Brummagem buttons. Sadly, the button trade went into decline in the late 1800s and early 1900s, but we have still got one firm that is making pearl buttons in the proper, old-fashioned and traditional way, George Hook and Sons.
Well, we go back, I would say, from about 1850. My great-grandfather started the business, George Hook and Company, and I'm the 4th generation in it now. My father is still working with me, and also my son has started this year. And we've always been in Birmingham, in and around the Jewellery Quarter when we first started, and now we're in Smethwick, up in the West Midlands.
Started doing pearl work when I was 15. The old man didn't want me to go into the job, but I was keen on getting her, you know. And at the finish he says, well, we used to wear aprons in them days. So he said to me mother, he says, make him apron, he says, and you can start. So I was 15 when I started. So I've been here ever since, doing pearl work.
What appealed to you about the game?
I don't know, I always liked it and I still like it now. And I'm 91 now.
How do you make a pearl button?
How do we make a pearl button? Well, we start off with the seashell. That's the mother of pearl oyster shell from Australia. And we have that sent over to us from a friend in Australia who cultures pearls in the shell. And when the oyster dies, he'll send the shell over to me. So we start off and we cut the blank out of the shell, which is just like a round, like a penny piece or something. And then we have to put the pattern on it and drill the holes in it, and then we polish it. So it's fairly straightforward work, really.
What's the market for pearl buttons today?
It's more your high-class, probably, clothes, really, because I mean the buttons aren't that, you know, they're not necessarily that cheap. They're cheap enough when they leave like my factory, but by the time perhaps a wholesaler and a retailer has got their hands into it, then it's a bit expensive. But it's mainly manufacturers, probably a bit more upmarket clothes.
Tell me about some of the machinery you've got here, George.
Most of the machinery is like what's been handed down through the business, really. I mean, we've got a cutting lathe, which you know probably have a look at later. We reckon that's about 150 years old, practically. So we know some of the stuff, we haven't progressed, really. We've got electric here, so that's a start, because, I mean, years ago, they used to treadle the machines, and there was no dust extraction, so the place used to look like as though it was full of dust, or like powder, like, you know. But, I mean, we've got dust extraction now, so that's not too bad, even though you still get a bit of dust about. But really, the machines haven't altered from day one.
Do you get satisfaction from the job that you do, George?
Oh yes, you get a lot of satisfaction. You're working with a natural material, which is beautiful in its own right, really, and you get such a variety of work in the trade. I mean, as well as buttons, we're doing handles for cutlery. We've been doing some furniture inlays lately for David Lindy Furniture, Princess Margaret's son. So I mean, we change. You know, we've got a lot of variety really in what we do. So you get a lot of satisfaction out of that.
Look at this. The pearl shell, and taking from it, making it into things of beauty like these buttons. George Hook and Sons are doing what Brummies have always done throughout their history. They have shown that industry and artistry go together, hand in hand. That connection is as obvious in the craft work of Fermin and Sons in Newtown Row. Skilled makers of buttons, badges, buckles and military regalia. Tony, tell me about your business.
Well, Fermin and Sons PLC is one of the 12 oldest established companies in the United Kingdom. Everybody will be familiar with our products, but are not familiar with our company. Let me give you some examples. As you see the policeman walking up and down the high street, look at his helmet plate on the front of his helmet, look at his tunic buttons, the numbers on the shoulder boards on his jersey. They will all have been manufactured by Fermin and Sons.
It's an old firm, isn't it? How did it get started?
Thomas Fermin set up business as a merchant at a place called Three Kings Court in the City of London. His business originally was as a merchant, trading in many different things, as many men did in those days, buying and selling. But by a chance meeting in a coffee house in the City of London with a colonel from the Garrison Artillery at the Tower of London, where they were chatting about the cost of gentlemen's clothing. Now, if you can picture clothing worn by men in the era of Charles II, those beautiful brocade coats, well, a gentleman's rank was denoted by the amount of ornamentation, the embroidery and the number of buttons on his tunic.
Yeah.
Now, if you can imagine in the 17th century, the soldiers of the British Army were kitted out by their colonels, by the commanding officer, from a small pool of money given to them by the government. Thomas Fermin, chatting with this colonel from the garrison artillery, said, "I'm sure I could make you a high-quality button cheaper than you're paying at the moment." Went back to his premises in Three Kings Court and manufactured a metal button, showed it to his newfound friend from the Tower of London, who liked them and decided to kit out the men in the garrison artillery with new buttons on their beautiful red coats. And from there, the metal button and badge that we now know on military uniforms began.
Now, how did the business develop in the succeeding years?
Thomas Fermin began to manufacture buttons for customers besides the military. So he would have been making buttons worn by liverymen in great households, coachmen, footmen and various people on the great estates, both here and overseas. He started to manufacture buttons worn by the gentlemen in the city of London, who were the dandies of the day, and also started to branch out into other small wares. Things like helmet plates and belt buckles. Shoe buckles were obviously the high fashion at the time. Fine buckles on gentlemen's sword belts. All of these would have added grist to the mill to Thomas Fermin's business.
Yeah. Now, they became button makers by royal appointment, didn't they?
Yes. Very, very early on in Fermin and Sons history, the quality of their buttons came to the attention of the royal household. And the company had its first royal warrant of appointment issued by the Lord Chamberlain's Department in 1796.
1796.
That's more than 200 years ago now, and we have had, or have been graced with, a royal warrant of appointment by every successive monarch since, which I think is probably a record.
You've got some of them here, haven't you, some of these warrants?
I have one of the oldest warrants of appointment still in existence. By virtue of the power invested in me by His Majesty, now His Majesty is George III, I do hereby constitute and appoint Philip Douglas Fermin to serve His Majesty's stables in quality of button maker in the room and place of Samuel Fermin deceased, and as both the goodness and price of the buttons delivered will be strictly examined into, so for the encouragement of such tradesmen as shall have the honour of serving His Majesty in the department, it is ordered that their bills shall be regularly paid at the end of each quarter. Now you'll remember that the King was a notorious bad payer, and that no poundage fee nor perquisite shall be given to the clerk of the stables, or to any other person whatsoever, given under my hand this 17th day of June, in the 36th year of His Majesty's reign, Anno Domini 1796. Fermin and Sons from its early days has been involved in the manufacture of what we call military accoutrements. An accoutrement is an add-on item. So it's a piece of equipment which is added to the soldier's overall uniform and dress. Two pieces which are perhaps well known worldwide, but many people will not know who manufactures them, are the state helmets and cuirasses. Cuirasses, that's a breastplate and a backplate to you and me, of the household cavalry.
Tony, as well as the cuirasses, you make the badges for the household cavalry.
We do. Badges come in all sizes, but one of the largest that we produce, and one of the largest in the country, is the badge that goes onto the front of the state helmet worn by the household cavalry. Now, a lot goes into the manufacture of the badge, but the most important part is the pattern making and the preparation. This is the pattern which we use as a guide. Now, you can see from the size of the helmet plate, the pattern is about 2 to 3 times larger than the helmet plate, and it's cut back to front. A die sinker who actually produces the pattern and produces the dies has to work backwards, so that when we stamp the piece of metal, it comes out the right way round. David has prepared his pattern, which is cut into the surface of the tile, back to front. And what he has is very similar to the pantograph. Do you remember the pantograph at school?
Yeah.
For drawing maps in your exercise book. So he's laid his pattern out, and a scribe is following the detail in the pattern, then transferring across using the pantograph. A spinning cutting tool is cutting the design into the surface of a piece of steel. When the die sinker is satisfied that he's cut all of the detail into the surface of the steel, we take the die off the machine into the stamp shop, where we will pour molten lead into the surface of the die and take what we call a lead impression. Now this is an impression of the design, which you saw on the pattern, with all the detail interpreted into the surface. Once we're happy at the factory that the detail is all there, the lead impression will be sent away to the customer for final approval. When he's approved the final design, we then harden and temper the die, and the die is ready to start stamping badges. But what we have are dies and tools for cap badges, medals, shoulder titles, buttons, commemorative items for corporate logos, British Olympic items, sporting medals, you name it, Fermin and Sons have stamped it. The next stage is to remove the surplus metal from around the outer edges and the inner parts of the design. Now those processes we call clipping and piercing.
Once it's ready, once the badge has been cut away from the surplus metal, I've saw some of them are coloured. Can we say how that happens?
Yes, that's where we move on to the finishing processes, where we apply vitreous enamels, low bake enamels, where we apply different golds and silvers to the outer metal.
So this is the colouring process?
Yeah, it's just applying the enamel, and then you have to dry it off. What I'm actually doing now is taking the rest of the moisture out of it, because I mean, if I was to fire it off while it was still wet, all the enamel would just pop out. So I'm drawing it out, and then I'll fire it off, and it goes like a sheet of glass.
Now, once you've done that, what's the next process?
Well, we have to wait for it to cool down, and then we'll linish it. We'll linish all the enamel down till you come to the lettering.
Look at the selection we've got here in front of us. Badges for the United Nations, badges for CNN International, and you can guarantee, £1 to a penny, that if you're a member of a club or a society and they give you a lapel badge, then it's made here in Birmingham by Fermin and Sons of Newtown, Birmingham. Ileton Street, a classic street in the jewellery quarter, filled with the substantial terraced dwellings built for the prosperous members of the middle class in the Georgian period. But then within a few years, the whole area was surrounded with the factories and workshops. Soot, noise and pollution was everywhere, and the wealthy fled. What became of their houses? Well, each one became a hive of activity, and inside them, every room was filled with a craftsman doing some particular trade. What's the thrill for you of making a thimble?
Well, you make it from scratch, from nothing, from a flat piece of silver, all the way up, pattern it, and I do everything myself.
The whole lot yourself? Yeah. So come on, take me through how you make a thimble.
Right, there's the flat, by that silver like that. You cut it out into circles, which are these, and they go through the dies, different stages, see, different stages, until they eventually, that's the last die. And then they knock down a punch, which is the size of the thimble, with these different tools.
Yeah.
Polished thimble.
So tell us, what's that called again, Frank?
That's burnishing.
And what does that really do to the thimble?
It gets the top of the silver off the first layer, and then it's like a polished tool, and you polish it up.
So that's when it gets that really glossy look.
Yeah. Now this is a very old machine. It's got a treadle underneath, which turns the thimble in the direction you want it to go. So.
So you've got to be good with your left foot?
Yeah. Knocked it on. Right. That digs into the metal.
Yeah.
Right. Now that's one petal. Right. So now, there's a flower.
Oh, that's beautiful. So what are you going to do now, Frank?
I'm going to do one on the side now. It's like the same as that, but as you say, the metal comes out this way. You see, just the same again. Treadle. You can alternate different patterns, different types. Or you can have two different flowers, in between one another. Or borders. You can put just a border on.
Frank, you've got a collection of thimbles here. Take me through some of them.
Yeah, well, these are the chase ones. Have you just seen me doing these on the machine, the chasing machine, as you can see. And this one's a stone set one. I do that myself, but that is quite a strong stone with the holes in. Tailors, because they like to feel the, tailor likes to feel the cloth. These are the bands I put on, fleur-de-lis.
Oh, those are beautiful.
Swallows. They're mainly collectors, but I do get orders from America who actually use them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they use the quilting thimbles and the tailor's thimbles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That must be a thrill to, know that they've been used.
Yeah, I think Americans tend to use their silver thimbles.
Yeah. Brummies once boasted that you could buy anything you wanted in Edgbaston Street, from a pin to a ship's anchor. Well, blokes like Frank Jones are proving that Brummagem still is the city of 1,000 trades. There were many other makers of metal goods who were renowned across the world. Amongst them were Hardmans. They started off at first by making ware for churches, plates and such like, and then they moved in to the manufacture of superb stained glass windows.
They started off as button manufacturers and were Catholics. So when the Catholic Emancipation Act was passed in 1829, they had the opportunity of fitting out Catholic churches with furnishings, mostly metalwork. Hardman met A.W.N. Pugin, who was a Catholic convert himself, an architect, an apologist for the Gothic revival. And he was really the great enthusiasm behind the firm, changing over from buttons to ecclesiastical plate in 1838. And then in 1845, they added stained glass. And then he took on one of the Hardman's nephews, John Hardman Powell, and Powell designed the window that is behind me at the moment for the church in the Church of the Messiah in Broad Street, which sadly is no longer.
Tell me about this window. What does it depict?
It's the story of David and Jonathan, which is a slightly unusual narrative for Birmingham churches, or for Hardman's indeed, because most of Hardman's work was really for Catholic churches and High Anglican churches. The Church of the Messiah had rather a different perspective, so they wanted Old Testament stories, for example, and that's why this particular one is slightly unusual in Hardman's output. But of course they were a firm that would design anything, and did, and they designed for churches all over the world, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, America. You'll find Hardman windows there. Birmingham has a long tradition of stained glass work, or enamel glass work. Matthew Bolton's colleague, Edgington, in fact, started off enamel glass, and we've got some examples of his work here. We have a small panel designed by Henry Payne and executed by one of his students called Rumour. And you can see all the elements of the Birmingham Art School training in there, the emphasis on the figure, for example, the emphasis on narrative and storytelling, and the strength of their drawing. That was really something that they excelled at. And of course they won lots of international medals and national art school medals to prove it.
Birmingham erupted onto the world stage because of the fame of its metal goods, drawing to itself people from all over to work in its factories. And as they came in, it seemed that each generation knocked down Brummagem and rebuilt it in its own image. No wonder that it appeared that throughout its history, Birmingham has been one great building site. Too many of the great structures of the past have disappeared, but here are a few that have survived and are amongst my favourites.
St Martin's, the parish church of Birmingham. Every Brummie knows it, every Brummie passes it, but how many of us have actually been inside? Come on, let's pop in and have a look.
Reverend Shirley Vetters, you're based at St Martin's Church. What is it about this building that interests you?
Well, I think quite a lot of things about it interest me. I came here 5 years ago and I was very impressed when I walked into the building to find so many people around just in the early part of the day, people who come from all walks of life that come in just to spend a few moments to be quiet here. And the church is open every day from 10 till 4. And people enjoy looking at the beautiful windows here, things that depict different parts of scripture, the beautiful ceiling and roof here. It's absolutely beautiful. And of course, most of all, the atmosphere in here, which gives people the opportunity to chat if they want to and ask for help or prayer.
Now, you've got a specific role as an industrial chaplain, as chaplain to the bull ring. Tell me about that.
Yes, I'm the markets chaplain, and my role is mainly to look after the market traders and do their baptisms, weddings, funerals, whatever, and visit them when they're sick. And I visit them on their market stalls and chat with them about how their businesses are going. The church for some time has had industrial chaplains who basically just remind people that God is wherever we are. He's not just in St Martin's Church or the cathedral or wherever. He's everywhere. He's with us in our businesses and cares about them and cares about every department of our lives. And that's what I try to bring home to people as I go around, and to let them know the caring aspect of God, who matters to God, whether their businesses are thriving in the same way that it matters to us.
The clergy of St Martin's have been reaching out to Brummies ever since there has been a Brummagem. It's likely that there was a wooden kind of church here in the 12th century, but 100 years later, as Birmingham began to grow into the great city we know today, then a new structure was erected. It was put up by the de Birminghams, whose tombs are all around us in the church. But they aren't the only famous Brummies that are associated with our parish church. I'm standing in the Guild Chapel, set up by the Guild of the Holy Cross, a kind of forerunner of the early government of Birmingham. They provided a town crier, midwives, nurses and made roads. Across the way is the Chantry Chapel. That was set up originally by the Clodsels, a well-known family in the Middle Ages who owned land around Saltley. Over the years, the church gradually deteriorated, and all that's left of the Norman age is a few stones in one of the chapels. Then, in 1873, it was decided to knock it down and rebuild it. The architect was a man called Chatwin, and he designed it in the Gothic style so that it would look like a building from the Middle Ages. One of the most impressive features of the new church was a stained glass window in the east, crafted by the renowned Birmingham firm of Hardman's. Sadly, it was destroyed during the Second World War. Holy Week, April 1941, a bomb falls just to the west of the church. It destroys much of the building, but it remains still there, unbowed by all the conflagration around it. And today, St Martin's, as in the past and throughout the history of Birmingham, continues to be a symbol not only of God, but of our city. There's been a lot of talk about Victorian values lately, about whether the 19th century was a good time to live in or a bad time. Well, it was a bit of both. But perhaps one of the great things that came out of the 1800s was the idea of civic pride, the belief that any great town or city owed a duty to its citizens, that the major facilities should be provided for the people who live there. Facilities such as parks, free libraries, and of course, public baths. That's why I'm here today at the great treasure of Birmingham, Moseley Road swimming baths. What are your specific memories of Moseley Road baths?
I had my first school swimming lessons here, Carl, in 1942. Used to have to get here for 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, and I came from Acotts Green and then get the bus back to school, and woe betide you if you missed the bus and you were late.
But the baths today are as important as they were in the past.
Oh yes, very much so. There are children who would never get the chance to learn to swim, particularly in this area, a built-up area, where it's a long way to the next nearest baths. Families who are on benefits can't afford the fares to get there and the entrance, and the children come here from schools, and it gives them a great advantage.
So it's a building from the Edwardian age, but it's got a future, Brenda?
Oh yes, yes, yes. It's unique, this one, in having two 25-metre pools. And it was built in 1907, and it's a fascinating building with the old washing baths, and there was a laundry facility here when it was opened. There was also a valeting service for the gentry, so that while they were having a bath, they could have the suits pressed.
The swimming pool is the part of the bath that you can see, but like any great building, there are areas that are hidden from view. Roy Burden is the pool manager, and he's been here for 11 years, and I asked him about the secret spots at Moseley Road baths.
We're actually in the boiler house now, Carl. This has changed quite a lot over recent years. We used to have Lancashire boilers, which were much bigger than these that we've got now. These are a lot more efficient. These were put in about 15 years ago. And this is where we heat the water in the swimming pools. We heat the water, as you can hear, for the washing baths and the heat for the whole building. But people don't see this, obviously, because it can be quite a dangerous place to just let people wander around. But we take tours of school kids, and general public, if they're interested in the building, we'll whip them up and take them around. And people love this place, Carl.
Are there other places like this that nobody normally sees?
Yes, there are. We've got an establishment laundry upstairs that we used to use for all the washing baths. All the towels and the old trunks that were used come back soiled. They have to go somewhere to be washed. And we had an establishment laundry upstairs that used to service a lot of the local pools as well.
Law and order always seems to be on everybody's lips, no matter what the age or wherever the place. But can you imagine a time when there aren't any proper policemen, where the only forces of law and of order are old-fashioned night watchmen walking around with a wooden rattle to signal danger and holding a lantern? Or perhaps they're supplemented by a part-time constable. Well, that was the case in Birmingham before 1839, when we got our first police force. And luckily, we have in the city, at Sparkhill, behind the present-day police station, a museum of all the effects and photographs of the Birmingham police force throughout its entirety. Dave Cross, you're curator of the Police Museum in Sparkhill. How did this museum come about?
It started off in the 1940s. We needed training. We started to collect old exhibits. Charlie Elworthy, a detective, started to collect them to use to teach police officers how to go about training and investigation. Eventually, needs change, and the museum was moved out of the police training centre, and it came to this building.
Tell me about some of the exhibits that you've got inside this museum.
It's a case of where to start. One of the favourites of prisoners' photographs, I've got over 5,000. The earliest photographs were taken on ambrotypes, glass negatives, and we've got about 13 of those. And then we go on to prisoners' photographs taken in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, and they show a true record of Birmingham. I've got the records of every Birmingham policeman since 1839, the discipline codes. P.C. Fry fined a shilling for not keeping his bedroom tidy. Another police officer fined a shilling for not reporting that Park Street hadn't been swept, which was part of his beat while it is on nights. That type of thing. I've got every police order since 1839, the records how we set up the police force, officers patrolling, having to keep in sight of one another.
The uniform of the early police officers in the Birmingham force would be recognisable to us today. It was blue all over. The only difference would be they had a rattle instead of a whistle, and they had a top hat like this one. But by the end of the 19th century, even the headgear had become familiar to those of us today. Now, I've got to make sure I put this on properly, because it has to be in line to make you lift your head up. In the late 1890s, there came a man from Ireland, Sir Charles Horton Rafter, from the Royal Irish Constabulary, who really transformed the Birmingham police force. He was here for a great number of years and was succeeded in the mid-1930s by his assistant, Cecil Moriarty. And it's from that period dates the belief that the police force in Birmingham were dominated by Irishmen and also Welsh blokes. Men who didn't stand no nonsense, but were also good-hearted and caring and knew the people through whose districts they paraded every day. A while ago, I was driving around the town and I saw something that made me look up and take notice and actually gave me a bit of a feeling of nostalgia. There was a buzz, an old-fashioned Birmingham city buzz, travelling around.
It was one of those with the deep, dark navy livery with the cream above it. The kind of ones that used to jump on at the back and hold on to that bar as they turned around the corners. I thought, where did this buzz come from? And then I found out that in Birmingham we have this fantastic museum, the Aston Manor Transport Museum. That's where I am today. I'm standing in front of a #1 buzz. I went on one like this many times, and I always wondered as a kid, why did the #1 and the #11 often have an A or a C after the numbers? And then as I got older, I realised anti-clockwise and clockwise. Well, I'm going to have a chat now with Matt Cooper, who's chairman of the museum, to ask him about how it got started and what they've got here.
Obviously, we haven't got much in the way of trams because, as you know, there's only one Birmingham tram still in existence. That's number 395, which is in the Science Museum in Birmingham. We do have the lower saloon of tramcar 107, which eventually we hope to restore. But we do have a nice selection of other vehicles, buses, coaches, single and double deck. We've got lorries, milk floats, you name it. We've got a little bit of everything, I think, in the museum. And I'm actually standing on the tram tracks, which are still in existence, so it brings a bit of the old feel of the depot when it was an operational depot, because of course it's over 40 years now since the last trams ran in Birmingham. It's amazing where vehicles do turn up from. You think that the whole class of a particular type of vehicle has disappeared, but take this vehicle behind me here. This, as far as we know, is the last surviving Midland Red Guy utility, which was built in 1944, very much to wartime standards, with wooden slatted seats, and very, very Spartan in appearance. But this turned up. It was found on an old airfield in Gloucestershire, and the Midland Red actually did smarten their utilities up quite considerably by modernising them, but the owner of this vehicle is actually putting it back to actually how it was in the 1940s.
There must be a lot of people involved in working on restoration and in the museum itself.
There are quite a number of people actually do work on the vehicles, because in addition to the people that actually work on the vehicles here, we have a number of outstations where we keep vehicles and restoration is going on there. Whilst we have something like 30 odd vehicles actually on show in the museum here, the museum and its members actually own over 120 vehicles, which is quite a staggering number, really.
And I bet you've got your own favourite though, haven't you, Mac?
I like them all, really, but I suppose if I think of one particular vehicle, I suppose it's my own single-decker vehicle, the Bournemouth Tiger Cub, which is currently undergoing major restoration. But they're all, you know, have some sort of appeal. I think it's just an interest generally in old transport.
And they haven't just got the real thing at this museum, they've also got a smashing working model.
This model is built to a size of 1/16. In this size you can get all the internal details in them and the motors under the floors as they should be, whereas most models in the smaller scales you've got the motor actually inside the vehicle, so you can do a true scale model. This is a particular model of the trolleybuses which ran along the most people remember them running along the Coventry Road until 1951 when they finished. Running something that has long since vanished from the streets, it's the only way in a place like Birmingham that you can see this sort of thing just in model form now.
Oh, wouldn't it be great to ride the number 8 one more time in our minds? Get back those days we left behind. We're waiting at Highgate for the number 8. Isn't it the way in bitter cold weather? You wait half hour, then 3 come together. Off we go at last. Kerwick's Lane we just have passed. To the Brewers where the driver's out like a shot, 'cause you got to have his you know what. Off again we took through flooding at Sparkbrook. There's the embassy and nestling, skating, boxing, dancing, wrestling. Into Golden Hillock I feel a proper pillock. Balaclava with scarf pinned at the back.
Now, if you think this car's going to fall apart like a scene from the Keystone Cops, well, think again. It's a Model T Ford, operated in the past by one of Brummagem's oldest businesses, Ephraim Phillips of Bissell Street in Highgate. And if you want to see magnificent vehicles like this, then get along to the Aston Manor Transport Museum. It's in Whitton Lane, Aston. It's open Saturdays, Sundays and bank holidays from 11 till 5, and it is really well worth a visit. Look where I am today. What a busting sight in it. Bournville Village Green. surrounded by the houses of the Bournville Village Trust and overlooked by the great works of Cadbury's. The results of the vision of one of that family, George Cadbury, a man who wanted to build a factory and a garden and have his workers living in good quality accommodation, laid out with gardens and trees in a rural setting. There are so many treasures around Bournville, but perhaps one of the least known is a building behind me. There it is, a tower with a cupola on the top and inside a thing called the carillon. Now, we've all seen the tower and we may have heard the carillon playing at 1/4 and 1/2 the hour, but what exactly is it? Let's find out. You're carillonneur of the Bournville Carillon. What exactly is it?
Right, the carillon, Carl, is an instrument of bells. It sounds a bit weird, but it's an instrument of bells. It's a real musical instrument which you play from a keyboard and a pedal board, just as you would a piano or an organ.
How did this carillon come to Birmingham?
Well, the carillon here at Bournville was put here by George Cadbury in 1906, and he was in the process with his brother of building the chocolate factory and the whole of the Bournville estate. And he went to Bruges. For what reason, we're not sure, but it may have been to perhaps see how they make chocolate there, I don't know. But he went to Bruges and he heard the carillon in Bruges, and he was so impressed with this sound that he thought that's something we need to grace Bournville and make Bournville special.
Have you been the only carillonneur?
No, but I'm one of only 3. So that's quite remarkable considering the carillon's been here since 1906.
Tell me about the earlier blokes.
Well, the first carillonneur was a man by the name of Harry Withers, and we've gathered some information about him, and he did establish quite a reputation. He played until 1924, and Clifford Ball then took over. Clifford, again, became a world-renowned figure. He was the first man to gain a certificate from the Carillon School in Mechelen and established a reputation for himself. He performed inaugural recitals in carillons all over the world where royalty performed the opening ceremony, and he was a very well-known man.
What does the instrument itself, the musical instrument of the carillon, mean to you?
What does it mean to me? Well, I get tremendous pleasure from playing the carillon, and the fact that you can play a range of music. You can play Bach, Beethoven, Andrew Lloyd Webber, you name it, and it's possible to play. Scott Joplin, you can play any sort of music on it at all.
Of course, Cadbury's gained their renown through the making of fine chocolate, cocoas and drinking chocolate. But they weren't the only manufacturer of food in Birmingham. What about Bird's Custard? Or Old Brook Sauce? And what about that host of small-scale makers of food? Can you cast your mind back to some of those tantalising smells of our childhood? The pork butchers, the faggots and pea shop, the fish and chip shop, and perhaps one of the most enticing aromas of all, that of bread baking. Bread made by so many of the master bakers of Birmingham, like this one here, Starkey's on Bristol Street, near to the city centre. Tell me a bit about the history of the firm.
Well, it goes back to 1888 when it was first started by Frank Starkey. He ran it for quite a few years. It was a craft baker, and I think I was told by his grandson that they're the first people to have horse-drawn carriages with 4 wheels. Because basically when bakers went out, they just had 2 wheels on the carriages.
Yes.
And they were the first people to have 4-wheeled carriages. Later, of course, during the early days of the war and before that, they went on to electric vans. And so it has changed over the years, but they used to have the horses over the road in Enstead Street. Marvellous, really. The bakery is still here, still erect, and it went through a world war. The other side of the road was devastated. The little cottages there, the bakery still stood firm, and it never closed. It's all computerised these days, so we can choose brown or white flour, We can put the amount in kilos that we want. It's automatically weighed. The long sleeve comes down, dropped into the bowl.
How do you make the dough from the flour?
Oh, now then, there are very few commodities in bread, really. We've got flour.
Yeah.
We need water, right? We need a little bit of fat, salt, and yeast. Now, this is where the skill starts. So we want one in each hand, right? Put them on the table, press it with the heel of your hand, and just bring it along into a roll. That ain't too bad. Turn it round now. That's it. Now do the same process again. Bring it over all the time. That's it, folding it in. Now what we want you to do now is by using the heel of your hands and your fingers to mould it into a round ball.
Nobody can make anything unless first of all they've had an idea. And throughout our history, Brummagem has been filled with folk who've had grand ideas. Folk like this guy behind me, Joseph Priestley, who discovered oxygen. He wasn't the only scientist, there were others. There were also many thinkers and folk who put their ideas down on paper.
Many places have got a novelist associated with them. Dickens for London, Arnold Bennett for Stoke-on-Trent and the Potteries. What about Brum? Well, we haven't got an author who's written about our city intimately, but we have got a number of world-famous writers who are deeply connected with Brummagem itself. For example, there was Conan Doyle, the man who thrilled the nation to the exploits of Sherlock Holmes and who coined a new phrase, elementary, my dear Watson. Conan Doyle wasn't the only world-famous author associated with Birmingham. Did you know that Rip Van Winkle, that tale of a man who fell asleep and came back to consciousness years later, well, that tale was actually written in Birmingham by Washington Irving when he was visiting his family, the Van Warts, who had an house in Ockley. But Birmingham has got one of its own sons, who is a celebrated and well-known author. The man is J.R.R. Tolkien. He was born in 1892 in South Africa, the son of a Brummie mum and dad. When he was 3, his mother came home to see her parents, and while she was back in Birmingham, his dad sadly died. There was no point in the family going back to South Africa, and so the Tolkiens grew up here in the village of Sparkhill, really more of an hamlet in Hall Green. Tolkien is renowned for 2 great and superb novels. There's The Lord of the Rings, an epic saga set in the mythical world of Middle-earth, peopled by strange yet wonderful beings like orcs, hobbits and elves. And then there's The Hobbit, a smaller book, yet it's the best-selling work of fiction in the 20th century. And both books are filled with resonances of the Birmingham in which Tolkien grew up, and particularly of the village of Sparkhill. No more is this more clear than in references to Sparkhill Mill itself. To the end of his days, Bilbo could never remember how he found himself outside, without an hat, a walking stick, or any money, or anything that he usually took with him when he went out, leaving his second breakfast half unfinished and quite unwashed up, pushing his keys into Gandalf's hands and running as fast as his furry feet could take him, past the great mill, across the water, and then on for a mile or more. Sparkhill Mill was powered by 2 pools, one of which was next to the building itself. The other was further away, more isolated and secluded. It was surrounded by trees and vegetation. It had a stream running nearby. It was a magical mystery land. Perhaps it was the inspiration for Tolkien's idea of the old forest in The Lord of the Rings itself. But the forest is queer. Everything in it is very much more alive, more aware of what is going on, so to speak, than things are in the Shire. And the trees do not like strangers. They watch you. They are usually content merely to watch you, as long as daylight lasts and don't do much. Occasionally, the most unfriendly ones may drop a branch or stick a root out or grasp at you with a long trailer. But at night, things can be most alarming, or so I'm told. I have only once or twice been in here after dark, and then only near the hedge. I thought all the trees were whispering to each other, passing news and plots along in an unintelligible language, and the branches swayed and groped without any wind. They do say the trees do actually move, and can surround strangers and hem them in. The Tolkiens lived in a number of parts of Birmingham, moving from Sarehole to Moseley and King's Heath, ending up in Stirling Road, Edgbaston, close to Perrott's Folly and the Tower of the Waterworks company behind it. Were these the ideas behind the two towers in The Lord of the Rings? Copies of Tolkien's work, and that of all the other writers associated with Birmingham, are collected in our central library in Chamberlain Square. In particular, the local studies and archives sections are an Aladdin's cave for anyone interested in Brum's history.
Well, Birmingham's very lucky in having probably the largest local history collection in the country. There's masses of material for anybody who's got any kind of interest in the local area. We've got a huge collection of photographs. It's supposed to be somewhere around about 2 million in total, and a large proportion of that is of local views. We've got a large genealogy collection as well for people who are interested in family history, which is probably one of the popular growth areas at the moment. I think it's a phenomenal number of people trying to trace their roots, so there's a lot of material in the department which helps with that. And of course all the newspapers, Post and Mail, the Gazette, Sports Argus, all the huge collection of local newspapers which are fantastically useful for tracing events that happened in the city's history and giving you a flavour of what life was like, say, in Victorian times.
The local studies collection didn't just emerge, and so I asked Patrick Baird, who's head of local studies and history services, to explain to me how this collection developed.
Well, it began way back in the mid-19th century when the very first central reference library was built.
What kind of things do you collect today?
I think very similar to materials of years ago. We still hopefully collect modern-day photographs. We collect up-to-date maps. We have newspapers. We also produce cuttings from the newspapers covering topics of interest today, and so on. My own particular personal favourite is actually a collection of mug shots of habitual drunkards in Birmingham. Shots taken between about the years 1903 and 1908, which are absolutely beautiful.
Richard, tell me about some of the evidence that we've got here. I noticed there's two views of Birmingham.
Yeah, that's right, Carl. This one's done in 1753, and it's a view of Birmingham from the east.
Bennett's Hill with St Philip's Cathedral, right at the very top.
And the fact that it was surrounded by countryside.
Yeah.
Now, this one's a really nice one, very popular print, this one. It's nicknamed Chamberlain's Birmingham. It was first published in 1886 in a magazine called The Graphic.
It's tremendous, actually, because you've got the town hall there, the council house, and the old library. Is that the library there, the old library?
That's the old library, which was knocked down in the 70s, yeah.
And then beyond, look, New Street Station, the glass roof.
Well, this is some playbills from the Grand Theatre in Birmingham, because, of course, there were loads and loads of theatres in the city in the past, of course, but which have disappeared gradually over the period of time. And this one just shows that we're on at the Grand. And the one that you've got I particularly like, because it's the Theatre Royal pantomimes.
Really?
Course, not only did they have nice colourful pantomime programmes, but in a lot of these, they actually have some of the script.
Really?
So I suppose it might be possible to go through these and reconstruct a Victorian pantomime.
Isn't this a busting sight? Victoria Square on a sunny spring day. People milling about, and everywhere you look, there are pieces of what today are called public art. The lady reclining in the fountain, the Iron Man behind me, and much more besides. And yet, statues and public art aren't new in the middle of Birmingham. But there's one statue that's in a more secluded spot, and I want to take you there today and have a chat about his contribution, not just to the history of Brummagem, but to the history of the world. Originally from Ayleshowen, Thomas Atwood came to Brummagem to become a banker. He had a number of different homes when he was in our city. One of them was in Hardman, another was in Sparkhill by Tillingham Street, where there's another statue recalling him. But what Atwood is remembered the most for is not his banking ability, but the fact that he was one of the greatest, if not the greatest, political leader of his age. Just think about it. In the 1820s, Birmingham was one of the most busy, vibrant and bustling cities, not only in England, but also in the world. And yet, we did not have an MP. We had no representation in Parliament. Worse than that, most Brummies never even had the vote. Thomas Atwood felt this was wrong. He started up, he activated, he led with great vigour the Birmingham Political Union, which dominated the campaign to bring about reform. And he had a number of mottos which he proclaimed every time he stood up to preach to people about the gospel of democracy. They were prosperity, reform and peace. And by this statue of Atwood, sculpted by Siobhan Coppinger, there are all the recollections of what made him such a powerful and great leader. Atwood and his followers were faced with one major problem. The lords and squires of England, they weren't going to give up power without a struggle. They wanted Britain to remain an undemocratic state dominated by a wealthy few. What was Atwood and the Birmingham Political Union to do? They didn't want to see a revolution. They argued for peace, law and order, and yet they knew that we needed change. We needed MPs for places like Birmingham and Manchester. We needed the vote to be extended. There was only one solution: to have huge meetings. The greatest meeting of them all took place here at the busy junction today of the Parade, George Street and Edward Street, halfway between Ockley, Ladywood and Windsor Green. 7th of May 1832. Just picture the scene. 200,000 people crowded into this natural bowl, formed by Newell Hill to the one side, Summerhill at the back, and Easy Hill going up towards the town. 200,000 people, when you think there was only 150,000 in Brummagem as a whole. But they weren't just Brummies, they come from all over the West Midlands, all joined together to bond with the Brummies from the button works and the pen nib factories, to make sure that nobody should ignore this great peal of freedom. And then, amidst all the noise and the hubbub, a great wagon came down from Great Charles Street. On the top of it stood Thomas Atwood himself, and as he reached just below me here, the wagon stopped, and a trumpeter got up, and he blew, and that huge throng of 200,000 men, women and children fell silent. Atwood stood up. He shouted out to the assembled multitude, "Will you be the slaves of boroughmongers, or would you rather die?" And a great cry rent the air as all these West Midland folk shouted out loud, "All of us, all of us." And then they took the oath to God and to everybody in this land. They took off their hats, and with their faces raised upwards, they said, in unbroken faith, through every peril and privation, we dedicate ourselves and our children to our country's cause. Parliament could no longer ignore the deep felt feeling throughout the whole of the nation for reform. Weeks after this massive meeting at Newell Hill, the Great Reform Act of 1832 was passed. Thanks to the people of this city, thanks to Thomas Atwood.
There you are, some aspects of Brum, and yet there is still so much more to explore in this great city of ours, the city of 1,000 trades. I hope you enjoyed that trip with me. I know I enjoyed going around Brummagem, and I look forward to seeing you again. Ta-ra a bit.
To your southern home where the weather is warm, it's always summer down Summer Lane. It's always summer in Summer Lane. It's always summer in Summer